Okay, I think we'll just start the meeting and let other people come in as they may. And this is one of our regular monthly meetings on topics that we consider to be important for our membership to have some more information about. This one is on basically the efforts in Illinois that the Prairie Rivers Network is doing to help specifically Illinois to address these climate change issues. And so our presenter is Amanda Pankau, who holds a BA in Ecology, Ethology, and Evolution from UIUC, and a master's in Wildlife Ecology from SIU. She coordinates Prairie Rivers Network's campaign to work with advocates, leaders, and communities to realize the benefits of clean, renewable energy and address the costs of non-renewable sources such as coal. So Amanda, you want to take it away?
Thank you very much. Let's see, can you guys see my slides?
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much
we can.
for having me tonight. I'm happy to tell you guys that you guys are some of the first people in the entire state to hear a presentation about the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. It's been law for less than a month. Governor Pritzker signed it on September 15th. And the folks I work with we're kind of still in the phase after passage of getting materials ready to go out and talk about it. So these are materials I put together to share with you some of the things in this new bill. You already heard an introduction about myself, and I just wanted to, most of you have probably heard of Prairie Rivers Network. We have a 50+ year history in East Central Illinois. If you're not a member, it's a great membership-based organization. I'd encourage you to join and join our mission of protecting water, healing land, and inspiring change. So I joined Prairie Rivers Network in the summer of 2017. And so I came on board just as Illinois had passed the Future Energy Jobs Act. And Prairie Rivers Network at this time joined the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. So you're going to hear about a lot of accomplishments on climate action and clean energy, and we certainly did not do this work alone. This is a coalition of businesses and organizations that are all working for a common goal of improving public health, bettering the environment, and creating new clean energy jobs. Our coalition was very deliberate in prioritizing the leadership and voices of Black and Brown leaders and communities, frontline, fossil fuel communities, environmental justice communities in our work. And that's one of the reasons we arrived with such success that you're going to hear about. But I did want to start by just sharing kind of where Illinois was up until now. And that was because of this Future Energy Jobs Act. So it set a goal for Illinois to have 25% renewable energy by 2025. And this was a goal that had been in place for several years, but prior to this CEJA, is what we called this bill, there wasn't a path to reach that goal. So if you guys have heard of neighbors or businesses going solar, it's because of this bill. It created these financial incentives called renewable energy credits. Basically, you get money back from the state if you put solar on your rooftop. It created community solar program, which is something I have personally because I have a shaded roof and can't go solar. So I've joined a community solar project, purchased a subscription and an offsite solar farm. I've got a great blog post about that if anybody's interested in hearing more. CEJA created what's known as the Solar for All program. I don't know this for sure, but I think Champaign-Urbana has more Solar for All projects than any other community in the state. These are solar projects on low-income households or on nonprofits that serve low-income households. Our CU projects are located on nonprofits. So Cunningham Children's Home, the Boys and Girls Club are a couple of those. This bill also created energy efficiency goals, tasking Ameren and ComEd to reduce energy waste by providing programs for their customers. And then finally, this bill set forth some limited clean energy workforce development programs. There was just a few throughout the state. And so there was definitely room to do more with workforce. So CEJA has made Illinois a Midwest leader in renewable energy. And unfortunately, we're also still a leader in emissions from the fossil fuel sector. We actually rank 7th in emissions from power plants. We rank 5th in emissions from cars and trucks, and 3rd in emissions from homes. So the coalition, Illinoisans knew that this wasn't enough. We needed to do more to tackle climate change. So this is a little bit more background. So the coalition decided we were going to talk to communities about what they wanted to see in Illinois' clean energy future. So we held over 100 community conversations. This represents possibly the largest ever participatory public policy effort in Illinois. Oftentimes, lawmakers or special interest groups go into a dark, smoky room, come out with a policy that then they, shove through the process and it becomes law. So that we wanted to do the opposite. So that we called this our Listen, Lead, Share campaign. There were a few events in Champaign, Urbana. A lot of these downstate events we were a Prairie Rivers Network, Faith in Place, we're a part of. We do a lot of work downstate with the coalition. So this phrase, Listen, Lead, Share, was about listening to communities, then leading with nation-leading climate and energy policy. And then the share part is then sharing in the benefits of the clean energy economy with everybody. So we're kind of at that share part of this campaign. We've passed the bill, a nation-leading bill, and now we're ready to share in the benefits. So part of that is, having conversations like we're going to have tonight, and then actually making these things a reality. So I've listed here kind of some of the things we heard from communities that they wanted to see in clean energy policy. We took all this feedback back to our coalition. At this point, we still had in-person meetings with policy and technical experts, and we started writing energy policy. And so from that effort, we came up with the Clean Energy Jobs Act that had these 4 goals. If you followed CEJA, is what we called this. We called these our 4 policy pillars: to have a carbon-free power sector by 2030, put Illinois in the path to 100% renewable energy by 2050, expand the use of electric vehicles to reduce pollution, and then to promote jobs, economic justice, and equity. So these are pictures of 7 different press conferences that were held across the state when we introduced CEJA in February of 2019. The one in the center with the bus is the one we had in Champaign, Urbana, at the bus barn in Urbana. Both Representative Ammons and Senator Bennett spoke at this press conference, and were both sponsors of CEJA from the very beginning. So that was February of 2019. We spent the next 2.5 years, fine-tuning the legislation. One of the things we did last year was really beef up our equity components of the bill. Kind of in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, we stepped back as a coalition and said, this is an opportunity to do more in building equitable jobs. How can we do that? So we spent 2.5 years refining the policy, but we also spent 2.5 years on grassroots actions that a lot of folks in Champaign, Urbana were a big part of. We wouldn't have been able to do what we did without all of this advocacy. So the Clean Energy Jobs Act is the bill that the Clean Jobs Coalition was pushing. The bill we ended up with is called the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. Interestingly, it has the same acronym, CEJA. So we're still talking about CEJA, even though it's a slightly different bill. You'll hear it called a negotiated comprehensive bill. These are several other bills that were thrown out between CEJA. Our CEJA was the first bill introduced in 2019. Over the course of 2020, several other bills came out. There were working groups that the governor convened. There were negotiation meetings, and we tried several different times over the course of this year, May, June, to pass the bill. It stalled, finally got it across the finish line in early September. So we now have the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which is being called the most equitable climate law in America. This is just a handful of the press that the bill has gotten, and hopefully you guys have had a bit of a chance to read about and celebrate what a great victory this is. So broadly, we can kind of divide what the bill does into these 4 categories, similar to our Clean Energy Jobs Act. So the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act tackles climate change and pollution by reducing carbon emissions. It sets Illinois on a path to 100% clean energy by 2050. It creates programs to ensure a just and equitable clean energy workforce. And it holds utilities accountable and creates new consumer protections. So I'm going to dive into the more specifics of how it does these things. I have some videos embedded in my presentation. I'm not, for time's sake tonight, I wasn't sure how long you guys wanted me to talk. So for time's sake, I'm not going to share these, but I'll be happy to share my slides if folks want to go back and watch these later. My point in sharing these was kind of twofold, or maybe threefold. One was so you didn't have to listen to me just talk for, you know, half hour plus, which it's going to be short. We shortened it up a bit. It was also to kind of frame what some of the problems were that we were trying to solve with this legislation. So in this case, obviously climate change, you know, kind of top of mind. And then thirdly, I wanted to show these videos to kind of show the broad diversity of people across the state that had, you know, interest in this legislation, interest in Illinois taking action to solve these problems. So again, I'm not going to show these, but happy to share my slides and encourage folks to go back. Some of them are inspirational, some of them frame, you know, real problems that are happening in the state, and we'll talk about how this bill or this new law addresses them. Okay. All right, little sneak peek there. So how does CEJA tackle climate change and pollution? So first and foremost, and one of the most controversial pieces of this bill, but also one of the biggest kind of reasons why many stakeholders wanted it done, was a $700 million in financial assistance to the Byron, Dresden, and Braidwood nuclear plants that will be paid out over a 5-year period. So these are ran by Exelon, and Exelon had come to the table wanting like a $5 billion bailout. So the governor commissioned a study, really pushed back on what they actually needed, and we arrived in the final bill at a $700 million over 5 years for those coal plants or those nuclear plants to produce carbon-free power. The Illinois relies on nuclear more than any other state in the nation. So CEJA will also require all private coal generating units in excess of 25 megawatts to eliminate carbon emissions by 2030. It requires all private natural gas plants to eliminate carbon emissions by 2045. And it also establishes interim closure dates. So some of the dirtiest gas plants and the gas plants operating in environmental justice communities will have to close sooner. So this is a process that the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency will be in charge of determining where pollution is the worst and then requiring those plants to close the soonest. So later you're going to hear me talk about implementation of this bill, and there's going to be need for public involvement. And this is an example of where that will be. There will be public processes or chances for public input and when and where these plants close. The last thing on this slide is also another very, or was one of the sticking points with getting this bill across the finish line, and that is the fate of the Prairie State Coal Plant and Springfield's Dolman Coal Plant. So these are coal plants that are owned by municipalities, or in Prairie State's case, it's owned by municipalities and rural electric cooperatives. So these plants fall into a bit of a separate category. They'll have to be 100% carbon free by 2045, but have an interim emission reductions goal of 45% no later than June 30th of 2038. So this was negotiations on the fate of Prairie State and Dolman were happening up until final hours, and neither party is completely happy with where we landed, but that's where it landed. So right now, our transportation sector in Illinois actually accounts for more carbon emissions than our power sector. So tackling climate change also means looking at electrifying our transportation sector. So some of these things I'm going to run through kind of quickly for time's sake, but the bill will require both ComEd and Ameren to develop beneficial electrification plans, looking at efforts to electrify the transportation sector, so including private vehicles, heavy duty vehicles, public transit, and school buses. The bill does create rebates for both charging infrastructure and prioritizing projects in low-income environmental justice communities, and then offers rebates for purchasing EVs. And finally, it creates an electric vehicle coordinator position at the IEPA to oversee EV policy and projects. So again, this is another program that the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency is tasked with overseeing. This is just kind of a small piece of the bill, but it's something that excites me. It creates the public schools carbon-free assessment program that requires large utilities to provide standardized assessments for all public schools to look how they can benefit from energy efficiency upgrades and other things to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the overall goal here is to have our public schools be carbon-free by 2030. So this is something that will go into effect. They'll start with schools in very pollution-ridden communities like East St. Louis, and then go from there. So what we should see those starting by the end of 2022. A lot of these programs are going to take a while to get up and running. So again, here's another video of my friend Michelle, who owns a solar business, talking about why we needed this bill to help save Illinois' solar industry. I talked about the Future Energy Jobs Act that created these new incentives to launch solar and wind in the state. This year, we were facing problems with the funding mechanism of those incentives that was basically halting solar development in the state. We've called it the solar cliff, which is basically this idea that we built this huge workforce, this huge solar workforce. And because of these funding problems, all those workers were going to fall off this funding cliff. So, whoops, once again, I'm accidentally playing it. So CEJA addresses the solar cliff to save Illinois solar businesses by correcting a provision that was in the Future Energy Jobs Act that had stranded those funds for solar. So it fixes that. You know, with CEJA, we had the 25% by 2025 goal. CEJA sets us on a goal of 40% by 2030, 50% by 2040, all in an effort to ultimately reach 100% by 2050. So I always kind of say it sets us on the path. this bill doesn't have every single thing we need to get to 100% by 2050, but we have to start somewhere. The bill creates new renewable energy programs and also boosts some of our existing programs. So, I talked about this solar schools assessment. This also creates a new category. So we have those renewable energy credits, which are the financial incentives. There are different categories where they say, okay, 15% of these incentives have to now be used for solar projects on schools. So that's new in this bill. There's a category that has to be used for community-driven community solar, which is basically improving our existing community solar program. A certain number of those incentives have to be used for solar projects that have BIPOC contractors. BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And then the program also, or the bill also boosts the Solar for All program, increasing the funding, I think like 5 times, from 10 to 50 million. So again, this is a program that we've seen projects in Champaign-Urbana and we'll definitely see more. People don't talk about energy efficiency as much as they do renewable energy, but it's certainly just as important. So CEJA will extend, I talked about CEJA created goals for Ameren and ComEd, energy efficiency goals that they had to meet. So CEJA extends those goals past 2030 and expands some of the programs that Ameren and ComEd were offering. A new thing in CEJA is this health and safety funding. So this is money that can be used to fix dangerous conditions that are found when installing energy efficiency measures in homes of families with low income. So Ameren has these programs to, go in and replace insulation maybe. Well, they get in there and they find that there's a leak in the roof and, they can't just put new insulation in when this area is leaking. So this money in this pot can be used in these low income homes to kind of fix slightly different problems that arise when they are doing these energy efficiency upgrades. I think I'm gonna skip over those last 3 there for time's sake. So we'll move on and talk about equity and justice in the clean energy economy. So again, this bill is being called the most equitable climate bill in the nation. So what that means is, and I think this is like the first few lines if you look at the written bill, it acknowledges that the clean energy economy is growing. So basically we're creating new businesses, new jobs. With that new economy, we have an opportunity, or that new economy is a vehicle for expanding equitable access to those jobs, to those wealth building opportunities. So this bill is just full of ways to ensure that underserved communities, Black and brown people that have traditionally been left out of new jobs and wealth building opportunities are included. So this video, kind of sad not to share it because I love it. This is Rakai. She lives in Peoria. She was a participant in one of the CEJA job training programs. She came out of the foster care program. So the CEJA workforce programs were also about helping uplift people. And now she works for Straight Up Solar. Solar, she says in the video, absolutely changed her life. They didn't just toss her into a solar technical program. There was kind of a soft skills training that she went through before the technical part that helped her just get her reading and math skills up, helped her just all around. So her story is great. Would encourage folks to come back and listen to that. All right, let's see if I can move on without hitting play this time. I might have to start play and then go. There we go. There's a lot of text on this screen, which I hate to do, but there is just so much here. So the bill provides new definitions for equity eligible communities, equity eligible persons, and equity eligible contractors. So these terms are used to describe persons and communities across Illinois that will be prioritized for hiring and contracting these state renewable energy credits, these financial incentives. So equity investment eligible communities are geographic areas of the state, so that are environmental justice communities, that are low income communities, underserved communities, have high levels of pollution. They use some definitions that were written in Illinois' cannabis law. So I don't know the details on what was in the cannabis law, but that's the gist of it. And then the people, equity eligible people, are folks that live in those communities, people that are formerly incarcerated, people that have been enrolled in the foster care system, and we'll hear later about some workforce programs. If you go through one of CEJA's workforce programs, you are then considered an equity eligible individual. And then these equity eligible contractors are businesses that are owned by equity eligible individuals. Need to find a better way of saying equity eligible. It's a bit of a tongue twister. So we create these new definitions, and then I've already mentioned this, that we have these state renewable energy credits that are financial incentives for going solar. There is a set aside of 10 to 40% of those credits are going to be used for equity eligible contractors. So only equity eligible contractors can use that percentage of the credits. It ranges from 10 to 40% because the price of those credits varies. So depending on the budget and how much each credit is worth, that will vary. And the credits for schools might cost different than the credits for equity eligible contractors. It creates an equity accountability system that mandates that all renewable energy projects commit that 10% of their work is done by equity eligible persons or contractors. And then this goes up to 30% by 2030. And then it creates reports on equity goals, including a regular review of whether the equity goals in the renewable energy credit program are in fact increasing diverse business growth and hiring. And then the Prevailing Wage Act applies to all renewable energy projects, except for there's a carve out for homes and houses of worship that are under 100 kilowatts. So anything over 100 kilowatts, these projects have to pay the folks working on them prevailing wage. And then labor unions that are benefiting from these renewable energy contracts are now going to be required to develop diversity, equity, and inclusion plans and provide annual public reporting on their diversity, equity, and inclusion numbers. And then, so this prevailing wage topic was another kind of point of contention in the negotiations. It's obviously a good thing to pay prevailing wage, but there was worry that new Black and brown contractors that didn't have generations of wealth building would have a hard time, wouldn't have the money in the bank as a new business to pay prevailing wage. So this last one here, equity eligible contractors will be eligible for prepaid renewable energy contracts. So typically you have to build the project before you get paid for the renewable energy credits. In this case, they can get that money up front to help finance the project, to help pay prevailing wage, instead of having to front all that money. So CEJA will create a Clean Jobs Workforce Network program and Clean Energy Contractor Incubator program that's going to create 13 workforce hubs and contractor incubators across the state. I have a map here that's pretty bad. The exciting news is that there will be a workforce hub in Champaign. There will also be a workforce hub in Danville and one in Decatur. So East Central Illinois really hit the jackpot on the placement of these workforce hubs. The locations were chosen based on low-income communities, environmental justice communities, and other pollution and health indicators is how they decided where to place these. So the red dots on the map, if you can see it all, are the location of those programs, or will be the location of those programs. They're going to be run by community organizations. So there'll be, some level of coordination across the program, but then community organizations will be charged in each community to develop and implement the programs. So similarly, there's a new program called the Energy Transition Navigators, and these are also community-based organizations that will provide education, outreach, and recruitment to eligible populations, trying to get people to take advantage of these workforce development programs. So basically recruiting, they're going to be recruiting for these programs, making sure individuals and communities are aware of the opportunities. And then there's an energy transition barrier reduction program that will provide resources on publicity. So again, advertising these programs, placing people in them, and then also breaking down barriers to participation. So out of this fund, it might pay for someone's bus pass. It might help pay for someone's childcare. So while they're enrolled in the program, they can apply to get extra support from this program to really break down the barriers that have traditionally kept folks from being able to participate. There's extra money in this transition barrier reduction program. The one I'm really excited about here, for time's sake, I'll just touch on the Returning Residents Clean Jobs Training Program. So this is something that wasn't in, a lot of these things weren't in the original Clean Energy Jobs Act. They were added last summer after the coalition really did a deep dive on equity. So this program, the second one on the list here, would train soon to be released people who are incarcerated. So train them for jobs in the solar and energy efficiency sectors. And then these last ones here are funding opportunities to help finance new energy businesses owned by equity eligible individuals. So this video talks about the impacts to the community of Havana when their coal-fired power plant closed. So it interviews the mayor of Havana and some of the laid-off coal workers, and kind of sets the stage for why we needed to support transitioning coal communities in our energy bill. So CEJA creates what's known as the Energy Community Reinvestment Act. So it creates this workforce commission within the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity to study the impacts to communities and workers as our coal-fired power plants and our natural gas plants across the state close. So communities are losing up to like 20% of their county tax revenue. So the schools are just being devastated when these big taxpayers, these coal plants that pay a lot of taxes, close. So this commission will study the impacts, be more prepared to help communities to even know when the closures are happening. There have been times when, there's just 2 or 3 months notice for a community that their plant is closing. The big thing here that communities are especially excited about, this is actually a big thing I have worked on, is working with coal communities and understanding the impacts and how public policy can help them. These community grants are going to be funded to the tune of $40 million a year that coal communities, other coal mine communities, energy communities can apply for to replace lost tax revenue, but also maybe fund new projects that will ultimately bring in new tax revenue. There are some provisions in the bill to help energy workers find new employment. Energy workers will be eligible to be placed in those clean jobs, workforce hubs, and contractor incubator programs that I talked about. And then this coal to solar and energy storage program is also pretty exciting. On one hand, it's kind of a handout to Vistra Energy, who owns a lot of these coal plants, but Vistra has committed to build solar farms and battery storage farms on the location of former coal plants. So it provides some extra incentives for them to do that. And then those new projects will start creating new tax revenue for these communities that have been hit the hardest. So finally, and I think kind of the most boring part of the bill, but also very important, is the utility accountability and consumer protection portions of the bill. Much of this was spurred by the 2020 ComEd bribery scandal. So ComEd happens to be a subsidiary of Exelon, who owns the nuclear plants and wanted the big bailouts. So this kind of threw a wrench in all the negotiations last year, because Exelon was asking for this big bailout. Here, their subsidiary has just now been charged with bribing Illinois public officials. And this is a scandal that ultimately led to Mike Madigan resigning as speaker as well. So it's just one of the reasons why we needed big, shattering changes in the way our utilities do business in the state of Illinois. And we really delivered on that. So we have a whole new division within the Illinois Commerce Commission devoted to ethics and accountability. And we have a new position known as the Utility Ethics and Compliance Monitor. Public officials in Illinois now have to give statements of economic interest. So if they need to disclose if any of their immediate family members are employed by a public utility in Illinois. The bill also is requiring the Illinois Commerce Commission to further investigate ComEd's misappropriation of ratepayer funds in connection with that bribery scandal. And so if ComEd is found to have misappropriated funds, they'll have to pay them back to ratepayers. So the bill also changes the way we develop electricity rates in the state. The utilities used to use something called the formula rate. So CEJA now ends the formula rate. So utilities are no longer rewarded for spending more on infrastructure. And instead now they're going to be compensated or rewarded for meeting metrics that the ICC puts out on reliability, supplier diversity, affordability, et cetera. Basically, they used to be able to just decide to spend a bunch of money on infrastructure that was going to allow them to spend money and get money, but wasn't really a benefit to ratepayers. So ending the formula rate is a good thing. Utilities are going to have to engage the public in grid investment decisions. And there's going to now be multi-year rate plans from utilities where the plan is going to have to specify the investments and costs for each year. And then those plans will have to be done every 4 years. So a lot more transparency in how rates are set in the state of Illinois. If you guys are interested in this is definitely my weak point in the bill. We have the Citizens Utility Board we work with a lot. And if folks were interested more on these topics, CUB would be a great resource to come and talk with you guys. There's a whole host of consumer protections, preventing late fees for low-income customers, preventing credit card convenience fees. Okay, so what's next? I mentioned having to implement CEJA, so I kind of divide that into two categories. Grassroots is kind of what we're doing tonight, talking with people in communities about what's in the bill, how people can take advantage, spreading the word. Then there's this regulatory side where all these agencies, the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, the Illinois Commerce Commission, the Illinois Power Agency, they're developing new programs. And written in the bill is that they have to get the public's input when they develop these new programs. So we've told them that they need to get our input, and now we've got to show up and give them our input. So you'll probably start hearing from Prairie Rivers Network and other groups that, you know, the Illinois Commerce Commission is having a hearing on getting input on how they should, you know, develop this new program, and can you sign up or mail in comments. So that's in the works. We still have, I think, a lot of work to do on our transportation sector and the pollution and carbon emissions from that. Prairie State Coal Plant at this point is still staying open till 2045. I can tell you a lot of environmental groups are turning their attention to that coal plant to make sure that it closes sooner. Illinois' coal mining industry is still going strong. There's a lot of advocacy and work that could be done there. And then finally, we want to turn these state wins on climate and clean energy into wins at the federal level. So some of you may have been following this better than I have, but right now our leaders in Washington are trying to pass both our infrastructure package. It actually passed the Senate in August to the tune of $1 trillion for federal spending on roads, bridges, clean drinking water, broadband, et cetera. But in conjunction with that, they're trying to pass the $3.5 trillion budget resolution known as Build Back Better. And this is where we'd really get into more programs on clean energy, climate action, electric vehicles. So there's a lot of work and advocacy that needs to happen there right now. I have 2 actions I was going to ask you guys to take today. I actually might have to, I can put them in the chat in a minute here. We want to thank our state lawmakers for passing CEJA. So we have an action alert. You can just type in your address and it'll send a thank you to your state legislator. And then Prairie Rivers Network has an action alert right now asking Senator Duckworth to ensure that the Build Back Better Act invests in environmental justice communities. And we just did a town hall last week. And there's a little highlight video here, just like a 2-minute video from that town hall where we elevated voices from environmental justice organizations. So I think I went longer than intended. I'm sorry. There's just so much. I cut like 10 slides today too. But I wanted to, take questions, and Trisha and I discussed some questions we could all talk about together as well.
Okay, and I guess, you know, having been involved in part of the political process for many, many, many years, you're asking, the bill includes some very wonderful things, but how is it going to get funded? I mean, there are many bills, many laws in Illinois that provide for really good things, but then the money never comes through. So do you have any feeling about how likely it is that this in fact will be funded?
Yeah, so the bill is primarily funded by a fee on ratepayers. So everybody in Illinois that is an Ameren or ComEd customer will see their rates go up slightly. So if you look at your Ameren, most of you are probably Ameren. If you look at your Ameren bill right now, there's already a couple line items on your bill that will say something about like renewable energy, clean energy. So the Future Energy Jobs Act that I mentioned that passed in 2016, it started those collection of fees from ratepayers that goes into a pot of money for all this stuff. So that is going to be increased. The Citizens Utility Board has estimated increases, I think, around like $3 to $6. I think a lot of those increases can be counteracted. Not if you're low income, there's a whole new host of low income opportunities. Signing up for community solar would save anybody in Ameren or ComEd territory more money than this new fee is gonna impose. So there is ways for folks to counteract that increase on their rate. So definitely there's a strong, definite funding mechanism for all of these things. We had advocated for a polluter's pay approach for some of the programs where we would have put a fee on carbon pollution, and that money would have gone into a pot to fund a lot of these programs. We also wanted to create a coal severance tax, which is a tax on coal that's being mined in the state of Illinois. Both of those things were in our original Clean Energy Jobs Act, but did not make it through the negotiation process. And ultimately, all of this will be funded by ratepayers.
When you, can I ask, is it
Yeah,
$3 to $6 a month or $3 to $6 a year?
$3 to $6 a month.
Ouch. Okay. I mean, given that none of the big boys have to pay anything, that's interesting. So.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the energy efficiency programs, the low income assistance programs, the community solar programs, like there's pretty much something that everybody could sign up for that would offset that increase each month. I joined the community solar program that just went online last month. Was my first time that it showed up on my bill, and will probably save me, you usually save about 20% off the supply side of your bill, which would be right about like $7 to $10 a month.
But if we all get a back off, then where's the money going to come from?
Right. Well, that comes from the fact that renewable
Businesses.
energy is cheap. Like, I wish I had that. That was one of the slides I took out. Wind and solar energy are the cheapest forms of electricity right now. You know, obviously they need to be paired with energy storage and demand response and other technologies. There is something in this bill that will start to study energy storage and see where we need to go with that. But a lot of those savings are going to be because wind and solar is cheap.
Okay, and I'm really impressed by the work that Prairie Rivers Network and the coalition has done to improve the equity aspects of the bill, to get to address especially environmental justice communities, the communities that have suffered from pollution disproportionately. And so it's almost like you're starting from scratch on all of those programs because they really haven't been in existence before now, right?
Yeah, I mean, with the workforce stuff, you know, I mentioned Rakai was a graduate of a program in Peoria. There was a program in Carterville, Illinois, and then there were a few Chicago-based programs. So we have just, you know, some experience doing this work. There's one of the pictures in my presentation here was, I think I meant to mention this. This here is a picture of Millennium Solar did one of the CEJA training programs. He was training about 300 people a year and thinks now he can train about 1,000 a year with the new programs in CEJA.
Okay, why don't you can stop sharing and maybe we can
Okay.
have the questions asked for everyone. And
Pull them up here.
Teresa, you have a question?
Yeah, specifically on solar jobs, we talked to a legislator, a couple of league members and I earlier in the summer, who sort of claimed that once you installed solar, there really weren't any ongoing jobs to compare with, like the stuff in the nuclear plants, for example, where you had people going in every day and making these good union wages. And I'm just curious about that. What are the jobs in solar? Because we're not talking about people working in a company making the solar things, right? What
Right.
are the jobs?
Yeah, let me pull up another slide here. This is one of the slides that I cut today. I mean, that's true, right? Like the jobs the job per kilowatt of energy produced is not going to be the same at a solar farm as it is at a nuclear plant or a coal plant. But there I mean, the growth in, when we talk about clean energy jobs, we're not just talking about solar and wind, we're talking about jobs in energy efficiency, jobs in electric vehicles. The Rivian, there's a electric vehicle manufacturing plant in Normal. Have you guys heard about this? Rivian, it employs 3,000 people now. So these are numbers prior to the COVID pandemic, because obviously COVID affected everything, but prior, so in 2019, the clean energy workforce was growing 5 times faster than overall statewide employment, 5 times faster. And these are small, 74% of our clean energy businesses employ less than 20 people. So this is, what you said is true, but you know, that's not a reason to keep a coal plant open. I don't think, you know, coal plants and coal mines are dirty, coal mines especially, dangerous jobs. You know, we're employing many more people in the clean energy sector now than we are in the fossil fuel sector, and this is going to grow. This is, I mean, it's just going to be tremendous growth with this new bill.
No, I wasn't suggesting that.
Yeah,
just-
I know. And really, yeah, just probably staying on the positive and just sharing these types of things. And here's this graph showing I usually start my presentations with these slides, just kind of level setting, like where we are, why this is happening, why this energy transition is happening. But you can see, you know, the price of solar in the last decade, it's just a whole new ball game right now. And these are, you know, a lot of people say, well, that's because they're subsidized. These are unsubsidized comparisons of energy costs. So you can see solar is yellow here and blue is wind, are now the cheapest forms of utility scale generation. So this is like a utility size solar farm, not a rooftop solar is more expensive than.
So
Yeah.
basically, from an economic point of view, part of your job is to make this go faster, because presumably any rational utility company is investing in their new infrastructure in solar and wind and not.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is happening anyway. And I've had a lot of since I live in Monticello, I have 2 Republican lawmakers that, you know, they'll say, well, we're not against clean energy, you know, it's happening anyway, but then they don't believe in climate change. So the urgency here is to transition faster, not to mention pollution from both the generation and transportation sector in cities, causing huge amounts of pollution. So yes, you're exactly right. Like, this is already happening. So actually, it's another slide I took out of my presentation. Coal has been declining primarily because of growth in natural gas. Illinois has lost over half of its coal plants over the last decade plus. So this is happening anyway. Yes, we want to accelerate it to fight climate change, but also because then we can lead. We're already a Midwestern leader. We could be a nationwide leader in this new economy and the workforce and businesses that, and you know, they start in Illinois, well, then they can go start doing projects in other states also, as other states catch up.
I can't see everyone now. If anyone else has some questions, just pipe right up. So
I have a question. Amanda, first of all, thanks a lot for your presentation. It was excellent.
Carol.
Can you hear me, guys?
Yep.
Okay,
Carol,
go
ahead.
It was very, very good.
Just go ahead and ask
the
your
question.
question.
Okay. But thank you so much for the presentation, Amanda. It was very good. She must not hear me. I've always been, and you're closer to it than I am, of course. I've always been perplexed, and I would be really kind of interested in hearing your thoughts about it. I feel like there's a huge difference in the climate change crisis. And I've never quite figured out why, like people my age are less inclined to see it as a crisis. And thank God for the younger people that they do. But do you have any thoughts about why there is such a discrepancy, so to speak, as far as the generations?
I don't. I wish I did. I mean, I think, I see a lot of, especially women, care more about it. When I do a post on Facebook, I can monitor like who's taking action on the post, or, their sex and age demographic. And there's definitely a lot of older people that care too. But I don't know. I think it's just the way the human brain works, right? We're not programmed to see past, that far in the future.
But we care about our grandkids. We just don't care about the climate. It's something that has really kind of, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about that, thinking why.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on that? I mean, this would be a great discussion question.
Linda, yeah, go ahead. I know you've been thinking about this.
Yeah. And I'm just speaking from a parent of a 19, 20-year-old. And I feel like they feel paralyzed about making any decisions about their future because they truly believe they don't have a future. So for people who say that kids aren't growing up and, taking on adult-like behaviors and things of that sort, I think climate change is tied into that. They feel paralyzed. And it's hard for them to move forward and make decisions about their future and have hope about their future ahead of them because of this. They just don't see it's being it's not a for certain thing of what life is going to be like for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Linda. That's really interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. The video that I didn't show, it was from a youth rally, and one of the speakers says, like, there's this phrase that young people have the weight of the world on their shoulders, and she's like, that feels real to me. It's not just a figure of speech, it's like actual weight of the world. So yes, I think that we owe young people a debt of gratitude for what we were able to accomplish in Illinois too. We found that Governor Pritzker was very moved by young people's actions with the climate strikes and other advocacy that they did. He would often respond publicly after a youth action occurred, where we as a coalition had been trying to, get him to say something publicly for months, and then the youth would do a climate strike and he would be in the news the next day responding. So we definitely owe them a debt of gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we can make these Illinois wins become federal wins. And I see Kelly, do you have your hand up?
Oh, I was just going to echo what Linda said. So I'm a millennial and I interact a lot with people in my peer group and people younger than me. And I have certainly seen that sentiment quite a lot of, especially in the wake of like the economic reality for Gen Z combined with the economic reality for millennials and Gen Z of like, we don't have as much financial power, which in turn makes people feel very powerless. And why would they put the effort into saving for the future or planning for the future when the world's going to end anyways? Like that seems to be a prevalent fear and sentiment of that there's no point in planning for the future, or paralyzing anxiety around the reality of the climate crisis and seeing people in power not take action to prevent it can be quite discouraging for people, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, definitely fear is paralyzing, right? I mean, we can all look back on our lives, but think about that when you are a young person and making just choices about what to study or what kind of career to have, or that's paralyzing. And the opposite of fear is hope. The opposite of hope is fear. And so And you can't stand, you're either in one or the other, right? There's, and we have days where we're in fear and days that we have hope, but we hope we have more hopeful days, but it's to keep the momentum going, right? And less days of standing in fear and more days in hope, so that we're actually working and making progress. And I think that's where our generation can help the younger generation, give them that hope.
Kathy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just curious. I want to make sure I heard you right, Amanda, when you said that Illinois relies more on nuclear power than any other state. I was really surprised.
Yeah, and I have actually, I made a pie chart of our energy mix, and this is from 2020. So it's a little off because of the pandemic. But I was going to put this in my presentation. And again, there's too much information. So this is something that got cut. I don't know if you can read that. But we're 58 in 2020, we were 58% nuclear, 18% coal, which that's probably likely to go up a little bit this year. I bet we'll be back around, probably not pushing 25% coal, but because of the pandemic, it was low. 14% natural gas, 7% wind and solar. I think we're at 8% now. And then 3% other, which is like biofuels are considered renewable. So I pulled them out. I think there's a little bit of oil. Not completely sure what's in that other category besides biofuels.
That's sort of
Also, I was curious, can you go over what were the criteria when they decided where workforce hubs were going to be located? When you mentioned Champaign, Danville, and Decatur?
Yes, and I can go back. I mean, they looked at low income populations. Let me stop the share here. So there's environmental justice communities are mapped. They looked at environmental justice communities. They looked at low income communities. And then they looked, I mean,
did you mention housing too?
I don't know. There was a whole host of like other public health type metrics that they looked at. This isn't my specialty. So I mean, I remember the day they sent us like all these different mapping tools that had these different metrics, and I could provide more information on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I remember Andrew and I were, Andrew is my coworker at Prairie Rivers. We're like, you know, this is great that East Central Illinois has 3 workforce hubs, but you know, what about Western Illinois? What about, you know, and there's a couple in Southern Illinois, but we didn't want to argue away East Central Illinois' hub locations, but they were pretty much set at that point anyway.
I was curious as to the reflection on what it says about the community. That's why I wondered what the metrics were.
Yeah.
So what Illinois agency has oversight for most of the implementation of these programs? Is it the Environmental Protection Agency?
The Environmental Protection Agency has oversight of a lot of the pollution related ones. So the electric vehicle stuff, the decarbonization, coal plant, natural gas plant stuff. The Illinois Power Agency is actually a wonderful state agency. We've just heard great things about it, and my coworker Kim works with them. They were created in 2007 to specifically look at procurement of renewable energy. So they're a huge regulating agency. I put their website in the chat. They're in charge of what's called the long-term renewable resources procurement plan. And they're in charge of the Solar for All program. So my coworker Kim is a Solar for All educator. She works with IPA a lot and has had just great things to say about them. So they do a lot of the renewable energy stuff. And then the Illinois Commerce Commission, the ICC, is tasked with oversight of utilities. So when it comes to all that utility accountability and consumer protection stuff, that is going to be housed with the ICC. So already there have been 2 ICC hearings, one last week and one this week, that were related to things that that were included in this bill. So these things, these kind of regulatory implementation things are happening already. And I can put that ICC stuff just to give you guys a taste of what's happening.
Amanda, are you optimistic about those regulatory agencies? Because I remember hearing not the most positive things about the Illinois Environmental Agency, for example, a number of years ago, like getting their attention about this and that. Just real quickly, how does someone get a position on those agencies? And what are the watchdog groups that keep their feet to the fire?
Yeah, so like the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, the director of that agency is appointed by the governor. So Governor Pritzker appointed John Kim as the director of IEPA. He replaced Alec Messina, who was Rauner's appointee. Messina was like an industry lobbyist, was not a good head of the IEPA. He was head when we were trying to pass the coal ash legislation and new rules. So it definitely depends on who's in office as governor and who you have leading the agency. You know, the Clean Jobs Coalition is fully committed to continuing work on implementation. I mean, the last thing we want to happen is to have done all this work and then have these programs fail. You know, I don't know if you guys followed the cannabis law in Illinois at all. It made a lot of promises for equity and opportunities for new Black and brown businesses, and those promises haven't really played out. So we're definitely, you know, committed to doing the work to make sure these things are implemented. So, and like I said, so we wrote a lot of public oversight into this bill. So basically, as they're implementing or creating these new programs, they have to have workshops and hearings. So I'm going to put one in the chat. This started last week. There was a hearing today, or workshop today, from 1 to 3 with the Illinois Commerce Commission, and they're asking for oversight on utility performance and tracking metrics for ComEd and Ameren. So I mentioned we got rid of formula rates, and now Ameren and ComEd basically can get rewarded for doing good things. So this workshop is about what do we want those metrics to measure for them to be able to be rewarded. So if this excites anybody, you know, we're going to be looking for community members, you know, grassroots volunteers to join these type of workshops and share, you know, what we want to see and all of these things. Obviously, this isn't a workshop that Prairie Rivers Network is leading on, but we're always going to be tied into the coalition and have information on when they are and what needs to be said. So that's just an example of already this is happening. You know, we're just trying to wrap our minds around the passage of the bill, and already ICC has dove in and is hosting workshops on what was mandated in the bill.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to change from the formula rates, because, you know, the formula rates reward spending.
Right.
And the more a utility spends, the more money they get from the, you know, rate holders. So to hear something else will be very, very influential.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that's sort of almost invisible to everybody, but has a really powerful underlying effect, I think. So I did some work in front of the ICC, and they listen. They have to work off the basis of a record in a proceeding that can be appealed to courts and things like that. So
Yeah.
they have to have evidence and work from there. Well, we've gone beyond our scheduled time, and Amanda has really been giving us the in-depth look at how this is going to change and improve renewable energy in Illinois. And I really would like to thank her for giving us this program. This program is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. So if you have other friends who might be interested, I'd urge you to ask them to look it up. So thank you very much. Anybody else have any closing remarks they want to make?
I would just like to just say also, Amanda, that your leadership and your presentation was outstanding. And I hope to see you doing great things related to energy and climate in the future. I can just see you doing them. Continue on, my friend.
Thank you, Carol. That means a lot.
Thank you
I have-
very much. Kelly?
Sorry, one quick question. You mentioned, there's a bunch of things that people can sign up for when we were talking about the rate increases, like the things that you had signed up for. Is there a good place to look those up and see what people could take advantage of?
Yeah. How about I'll put together just like a bullet point list that I can, Trisha, can you send out people like my slides, and then I can put together a list. I've got a blog post about community solar that I could share. I can tell you I signed up with Nexamp. I wouldn't be surprised if you all haven't gotten a flyer in your mailbox from Nexamp at some point. It seems like a scam. It's not. It's a community solar offering, but there's a few other companies that you can sign up with as well. But I could put together a bullet point list, and we could send that out with my slides and other links to the 2 action alerts if you want to share with friends.
I think we can do a follow-up
great.
Thank you.
email blast to members with all the pertinent information. So thank you very much. Okay,
Thank
with
you,
that,
everybody.
I guess we're done, and thank you all for attending.
Bye, y'all.
Period.